would you mind handing these out? Try to keep one. There you go. I'll come behind you with another one. I'll leave one for you. Hey. Sure. Sure. Oh. Okay. Sure, that's fine. Guys, pass those down. Tell you what, anybody comes in late, I'll tell them they can get these from right here. Okay. Well, not quite. Hey guys, we'll start in a couple of minutes. I'm greatly hopeful that our live stream is working with the regular cameras and everything. So hopefully that's all working. And so folks online will start formally here in a couple of minutes. But this is our last session for a while until after the holidays. And so maybe by January it won't be quite so dark. I don't know. I think it'll be. It'll still be pretty dark, maybe, but it'll probably be colder too by January. But it's hard for me that Christmas is 5 weeks from today. Huh? Yeah, Christmas is 5 weeks from today. So, yeah, I do too. I haven't bought a single thing, and I only have to buy for one person because. That's Janine. She buys everything else pretty much, and I just have to buy for her, and I still end up behind. But
do you have any suggestions for those of us?
Well, last year I bought her the very romantic gift of a new dishwasher, but the way I did it was, ours had been the door wouldn't shut right, and it wouldn't dry the dishes and all that, and I to enable to quote, have something wrapped up, I wasn't going to wrap up a dishwasher, nor was I going to pick one out without her. I knew that was also not a good plan, but I went and found a Barbie dishwasher. They make Barbie furniture for everything. Barbie's dream house, and I found a Barbie dishwasher. I wrapped it up, and I said, let's go, buy a dishwasher. That was Christmas of 23, and we bought it about 3 weeks ago. It took us 10 months to actually follow through and do that. Not her fault. Maybe it was just the fact that with all the grandkids that we have at our house during the week, and then Saturday being a day to catch up on everything that we need to get caught up on. We just had not had time, but we did have finally a day of errand day, and that included a trip to Han, and we actually got a dishwasher. So, and it dries the dishes. That was her pet peeve, that they would finish and they would be soaking wet at the end of the cycle, and but this one actually does dry the dishes too. So, yeah, you go to the warehouse one or whatever, yeah. And they have some sales and all that. So, but that was my big idea for last Christmas. Now I don't think we need a major appliance for this Christmas. So I'll have to think of something else to some Barbie things. She was very smart, knowing that someday we would hopefully have grandchildren, and both grandsons and granddaughters. So she packed up a lot of the Barbie stuff from our girls It's in the garage. Our little girls haven't quite graduated to Barbie yet. They're still a little young for Barbie, but it's out there. Huh? I think most of them. I don't think our girls were the ones who'd cut the hair. I don't think. I think most of them. And Andrew still. There was still some. I'm not sure what all Andrew had out there, but he had some stuff out there too. Pokemon stuff primarily, probably, and Power Ranger and some of those other things that were popular when he was little. But yeah, she saved a lot of that for the day that we would have grandchildren. So now we do, and so it's been waiting all these years to make a reappearance. So anyway, well, I think it is about 6 o'clock, and so welcome folks here in the sanctuary. Welcome folks. I think that's the camera that's on. Online, and we are been looking at some people in the Old Testament, and especially in the book of Judges and Esther, and tonight we're going to look at Gideon. And before we do that, though, the handout, and if you came in, if you didn't get a handout, they're on the little music stand up there. This handout is the Judges, and just to remind us, yeah, there's some right on that music stand. To remind us that the book of Judges in some ways is a bridge between Joshua, who actually leads the people of Israel across the Jordan to take the promised land, to take Canaan, one sort of battle and skirmish at a time. So, the book of Joshua is sort of the capstone of Exodus, where after the wandering and the old generation that fled or escaped from Egypt dies out, and the new generation finally crosses after 40 years into the promised land, and Joshua leads them as Moses has died on the east side of the Jordan, and Joshua leads them into the promised land, starting with Jericho, and then on through the other battles there. And Joshua's famous speech is, you all do what you need to do, but as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. And that's how Joshua ends, with them really basically gotten a foothold, at least, or more or less conquered Canaan. And then we have Judges and Ruth, but then we get into 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, which tells us the story first of Samuel, and then the first king, Saul, son of Kish, and then his young general, David, who ends up, becoming a rival, at least in Saul's eyes, and David becomes the great king, and then his son Solomon, etc. So Judges is that period in between. And you notice the quote, I chose this, I found this graphic, and I thought the chart was handy, but the graphic from Judges 21:25 at the very bottom is very emblematic of this period in many ways. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Every man, and really every person, every man did that which was right in his own eyes, which is another way of saying it was more or less chaos. It was more or less, the people were not following the law of Moses. The people were not following the God of Israel that had led their forefathers and foremothers out of bondage in Egypt. It was a time of cycle of much disobedience, much lawlessness, and much skirmishes with the other people in the land. Not only the people who lived in other parts of Canaan, along the coast or in the different areas, but also just the desert marauders, the sort of nomadic people, and who would often be large groups of marauders who would, come into a town and steal and rob and rape and kill, and live then from place to place. So it was a very lawless time, and as we said, in the midst of that lawlessness, God would raise up these judges, which, as we mentioned last week, when we hear the word judge, we think of somebody in a courtroom with a black robe and all that. And this is not who these men were, or men and women were. Because, of course, Deborah is a judge. So She is a female judge. That's not the kind of judge these are. These are more or less charismatic warrior leaders who rise up to lead for a generation, to deliver the Israelites in some ways often out of bondage or from their enemies, and then are succeeded not necessarily by their kin or their children, but by another leader that comes from even a different tribe or a different family line. And guys, there's a couple of handouts here on the music stand if you want to come grab one of those. So you see these names, and you see the names of 17 judges that are mentioned there, and most of them are unfamiliar to us. The most familiar ones would be Samson, that we talked about last week, Gideon, that we're talking about tonight. Deborah would be not quite as well known as Samson and Gideon, but probably be at least better known than the rest of them. And then you get to Samuel. Samuel really takes his place as a transitional figure between the judges and the first king, and of course 2 books named after Samuel. But you notice they come from different tribes. Because you remember, we have these 12 tribes that have come into Canaan, and each tribe receives a different parcel of land as they divide up the territory among the 12 tribes, which are named after the 12 sons of Jacob, aka Israel. Jacob, the son of Isaac, who, along with his twin brother, are born to Isaac and Rebekah. He has the 12 sons by the 4 different women, but Jacob, after his wrestling match with God, has his name changed to Israel, he who wrestles with God. And so the 12 tribes of Israel are the 12 sons of Jacob, and they each have a different piece of territory. And as you look, you want to look at the other handout if you want, notice that most of the action in the story of Gideon takes place among several of the tribes. The tribe of Ephraim, there towards the bottom, the tribe of Manasseh, and the tribe of Naphtali, Zebulun, and Asher. So those 5 tribes are where most of the action of Gideon takes place. These are not the best known of the tribes. The best known tribe, of course, is the tribe of Judah. It's the largest and the strongest tribe, from which the name Jew comes from, the tribe of Judah. But these are the 5 of the other tribes that have this part of the land. They're on the west side of the Jordan River, that river that runs down there's the Jordan River. And as we go through the story of Gideon, you'll see some of these locations mentioned. And that's just to give you a sense of where we're talking about in these stories. And a little guide as to where some of the battles that we're about to read about take place. So we actually are going backwards from Samson. Samson actually is the story that takes place after Gideon, and I did that really on purpose because I didn't really want to end with Samson, because Samson is just such a knucklehead and not a very good role model in any sense of the imagination. I wanted to end with somebody who was a little bit better role model than Samson. Gideon definitely is a better judge than Samson. He has his own flaws, and as we see, his own family has some issues as well. But let's start the story of Gideon. And the story begins as several of these stories begin. Again, you can see this is a recurring theme in the book of Judges. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of Yahweh, in the eyes of the Lord. And I know I say this often, but anytime you see the word L-O-R-D with all caps like that, it is Yahweh. It is the actual Hebrew name of God, Yahweh. That is a derivation of the verb to be. God reveals himself and says, I am that I am. And Yahweh is a form of that to be verb. So Yahweh, we used to pronounce it Jehovah, but scholars figured out that pronunciation's not right, that Yahweh is the right way to pronounce this Hebrew word. Yahweh, every time you see Lord, all in caps like that, it's Yahweh. So Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, of Yahweh. and for 7 years gave them into the hands of the Midianites. This is one of the various Canaanite people that Israel struggles with for centuries, the Midianites. And because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. So the Midianite, you would see really as an occupation. And we're going to see that the Midianites not only really had an occupation of Israel, but they continually just stole everything that the Israelites had, including their crops. If the Israelites would raise any kind of crop, once it was ready, the Midianites would come in and take it. They were continually taking everything of value from the Israelites. So the Israelites were actually literally hiding sometimes in caves and in other places to try to keep their goods, their children, their women, everything away from the Midianite raiders. And because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters in clefts, caves, strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern people, this would be people more to the east, on the eastern edge of what we would think of as Palestine or Canaan, closer to the Mediterranean, invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza. And of course, we know more than ever where Gaza is. Gaza is that southern part of Israel that borders Egypt. And did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count the men and their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. This is the first mention of the use of camels in warfare in the Bible. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to Yahweh for help. The Israelites have turned away from following God, from following the Lord. They're doing evil in the sight of the Lord, and because of their evil, they are under the oppression of the Midianites as well as the Amalekites. But the situation gets so bad, as is going to happen over and over, not just in the book of Judges, but in all through these Old Testament books, over and over and over, when things got bad and the Israelites had turned away from God. In desperation, they turned back to God, which, we read about it here, and we see it in our time in a slightly different way. Sometimes people who have no thought for God at all, suddenly when tragedy strikes or crisis strikes, maybe they get a little bit of religion at that moment. They suddenly might turn to God that they had not done in years, when suddenly they're faced with a huge crisis. Suddenly maybe they ask for God's help. What's the old saying that's probably not said very, I'm old enough to remember these sayings, like there are no atheists in the foxhole, things like that. When you're about to die, suddenly maybe God becomes a little more important to people. So that's the way it is with the Israelites. When they get into real trouble, they remember, we're supposed to be worshiping Yahweh. And they turn to him and cry out to him for help. So it says in verse 6-7, when the Israelites, I did tell you we're in chapter 6, I hope you knew that. When the Israelites cried to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, this is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says. I brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I snatched you from the power of Egypt and from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them from before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am Yahweh your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me. Reminding them, of course, they are the descendants of those who were slaves in Egypt. But he says, you've forgotten all of that I am your deliverer, and you have not followed me. Then it says, the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abizrite. The Abizrites is a clan inside of one of the tribes, the 12 tribes within the tribe of Manasseh. So the Abizrites, inside these 12 tribes, there are, clans and family groups that are subgroups of the tribe. And the Abizrites are one of the clans, one of the family groupings that are part of the larger tribe of Manasseh, which itself is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? So, Joash, the Abizrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. Now, I am a city boy. What about that sentence is weird? Does anybody know anything about threshing wheat? You wouldn't do it in a wine press. No, you don't thresh wheat in a wine press. You thresh wheat on a threshing floor, at least in ancient times. Why is he threshing wheat in a wine press? To hide it from the Midianites. Right. He's trying to thresh the wheat in a way that the Midianites will not come in and immediately confiscate it. He's trying to do it in a way, instead of doing it more out in the open on a threshing floor, he's doing it in a wine press to keep it, hoping maybe it won't get immediately stolen and confiscated by the occupying force of Midian. Okay? So again, most of us who we don't thresh wheat, we don't make wine. I mean, we don't live, most of us, in that culture of agricultural. Some of you all do, but even there, we probably maybe don't thresh it the same way that it was threshed, thousands of years ago. We read that sentence and we go, okay, and we don't realize the impact of that sentence. Why is he doing that? He's doing that because they're hiding in caves, because of the Midianites. To keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior," which is a greeting. You think about how angels greet humans. You think about how, for example, how did Gabriel greet Mary in the Christmas story? He says, "Greetings, you who are highly favored." You remember that's the way Gabriel greets Mary. And remember it says, "And Mary was greatly troubled by the greeting." What does that mean? So he greets Gideon, "Greetings, the Lord's with you, mighty warrior." And just as a side note, when we hear the word angel, both in Hebrew and in Greek, anytime we see the word angel, it's a translation of a Hebrew word in the Old Testament or a Greek word in the New Testament that doesn't necessarily mean a supernatural being. The word angel means messenger. It's just another word for messenger. So you don't always when we see that word angel, and it's, of course, this is where translation is not just a simple thing. Bible translators, it's not just like you got a book here and a book here and translators have to make lots of decisions when they are translating the Bible from Hebrew to English or Greek to English. And you come across that word, do I translate it as angel or do I translate it as messenger? Because it can mean either. It can mean either. You have to look at the context. If it says, the king sent, an angelos to the king asking for terms of peace, you probably translate it as messenger. if you say, then God sent this messenger to proclaim this to this person, you're more inclined to translate it as angel, depending on the context. And that's the way it is with, again, it wasn't really until I started to study, until I get to seminary and you start to really study these other biblical languages. You study, and my knowledge of both is very small. But study enough Hebrew and study enough Greek to understand that a Bible translator has to make lots of choices about what, in this example, what English word fits best. And often, if you have several Bibles in front of you and you read, well, how come they translate it this way and they translate it this way? Well, it's because, that word in Greek or Hebrew can be translated more than one way. The easiest example, for example, is in Greek, the word pneuma, as in our English word pneumonia, pneumatic. The Greek word pneuma can be translated wind, or it can be translated breath, or it can be translated spirit. And so when you see the word pneuma in the New Testament, do you translate it as the English word wind, or the English word breath, or the English word spirit? Because it can be translated any of those three ways. So as a Bible translator, you've got decisions to make from the context. And usually the context will tell you, the pneuma blew over the tree. Well, you know what it is, Or he died and lost all of his pneuma. Well, it's breath. Or, you can usually, from context, know which is the appropriate translation, but not always. And before I go too off on a tangent, I saw a meme of a bookstore somewhere, a Christian bookstore, and on the sign on the bookstore, the Christian bookstore said, "The King James Only Bookstore," which meant that the only Bible you could buy in that bookstore was the King James translation, from 1603, which is now over 400 years ago. And I love the King James translation. The words are beautiful and poetic. It's the same period of time of Shakespeare. The King James Bible is a beautiful translation, but people don't talk the same way they did in 1603. And some words have changed their meaning even, which is why if you open the King James translation and you have the story of the mothers bringing their little ones and they want their little ones to meet Jesus, and the disciples are like, no, Jesus doesn't have time. And it says in the King James, but Jesus said, "Suffer the children to come unto me." Suffer the children to come unto me. Because the word suffer has changed its meaning in 400 years. We hear the word suffer and we think, oh, that person's laying there with a wound and they're suffering. But what happened about 100 years ago with women and voting? The suffrage movement, the women's suffrage movement. The word suffrage used to mean permit, allow. That's what the word suffer meant. So when Jesus says, "Suffer the children to come to me," he's saying, permit the children to come to me, allow the children to come to me. But when we see the word suffer now in the 21st century, we don't think of the word suffer meaning permit or allow. We think it means in pain. And so if you only have the King James Bible, words change their meaning. And translators have to change how they translate Hebrew and Greek. So anyway, that's a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I'm just saying, Bible translation is not just a matter of plugging it into a computer and spitting out a translation, or Google Translate. It is a science all its own of translation. So, where was I? Okay, so he says, this angel this messenger of the Lord, which I think we're going to see in context, is not just a human. The Lord's with you, mighty warrior, but sir. And the word that's translated sir there is the Hebrew word for Lord. But the word that sometimes can be translated Lord and sometimes translated simply sir. You know, depending on the context. It's like, excuse me, sir, excuse me, Lord. It depends on the context. But Sir, Gideon replied, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all those wonders that our fathers told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? Now the Lord has abandoned us and put us in the hand of Midian. So right off the bat, you know, Gideon is like, what do you mean the Lord is with us or the Lord is with me? Sure doesn't look like it. We're hiding in caves from the Midianites. In what way is the Lord with us or with me? What do you mean the Lord is with us? Our fathers talked about this big exodus out of Egypt, but we don't see that. We just see we're hiding in caves. Then it says, the Lord turned to him, which, okay, this is a little confusing because the story goes back and forth from referring to the angel of the Lord or just saying the Lord. In that part of, as the story gets told and retold and retold and retold, I think we're to understand the spokesman of the Lord, not literally God coming down, you know, in a more literal way. This messenger of the Lord, the angel of the Lord, turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? But Lord, which there can be, or could mean sir. My Bible has a note. This word could be translated Lord, or it could be translated sir. But sir, or but Lord, Gideon asked, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family. Remember, we got the tribe of Manasseh. He says, my clan, my family group inside the clan of Manasseh is the weakest clan, and I'm like the youngest of the young of the weakest family in the clan. I'm at the very, very bottom of this whole tribe. And you're calling me mighty warrior, and I don't know that that applies to me. The Lord answered, I'll be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites together. So Gideon says, well, if now I found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it's really you talking to me. Please don't go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you. The Lord said, I'll wait until you return. Again, they interchangeably use the word Lord and angel of the Lord in this whole story, which is frustrating to us and a little confusing. But I think we're to understand a messenger of the Lord, angel of the Lord. Gideon went in, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread without yeast. What do we call bread without yeast? Unleavened bread, or matzah. Putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. And the angel of the Lord said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and place them on the rock and pour out the broth. And Gideon did so, and with the tip of the staff that was in his hand, the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread. So the rock becomes an impromptu altar. And the meat that he was offering to the stranger, the visitor, the messenger, the angel, instead of consuming it in a communal meal, they put it on the rock and it becomes an offering to God, and it's consumed in fire. And then the angel of the Lord disappeared as the offering is consumed. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, oh, sovereign Lord, I've seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord said to him, peace, don't be afraid, you're not going to die. And again, we as the reader are like, okay, earlier we know you can't see the face of God and survive. And in what way is this an appearance of God himself? In what way is this an appearance of an angel? Because the author keeps switching between Lord and angel of the Lord. And that's the way they wrote the story. And I still am holding to an angel as the more likely explanation. So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." In other words, Yahweh is Shalom. To this day, it stands in Ophrah of the Abiezrites, this subclan of Manasseh. That same night, the Lord said to him, "Take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that's 7 years old. Tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to Yahweh your God on top of this height, using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down. Offer the second bull as a burnt offering." What does this tell us about his father? His father is worshiping Baal. And Asherah, his father is worshiping the god of the Midianites. Remember, Baal, or some people say Baal, probably Baal. Baal is a fertility god of the Canaanites and is the most frequent in this part of the Bible, the most frequent sort of rival for the worship of Yahweh. When we get over to Elijah, if you remember, it's the contest of which God is going to send the fire. Is it Yahweh or is it Baal? So Baal is this rival god, but Baal is a fertility god, and his female consort is Asherah. So Baal and Asherah go together, and an Asherah pole was again, fertility symbol that often was next to an altar to Baal. So he tells, go to your father's altar to Baal, tear it down, go to take the Asherah pole, that is the fertility symbol for the goddess consort of Baal, chop it up as firewood, and turn this into an altar for Yahweh. Turn it into an altar for the true God. Take one of your father's bulls and sacrifice the bull upon this now new altar to Yahweh as a burnt offering to the Lord. And it says, that's what he tells him to do. Tear down the old altars and symbols, create an altar for Yahweh, offer one of your father's bulls on it. And it says he did all that. It says, 27, Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the men of the town, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. He's not going to do this in broad daylight. He's going to do it in the middle of the night where nobody will see him do it. So he follows the Lord's instructions in the middle of the night, secretly. But morning comes. Verse 28. In the morning, when the men of the town got up, there was Baal's altar demolished, with the Asherah pole beside it cut down, and the second bull sacrificed on the newly built altar. They find all of this, and they ask each other, who did this? Well, it didn't take them too long. When they carefully investigated, they were told, well, Gideon did it. Gideon, son of Joash, did it. The men of the town demanded of Joash, bring out your son, he must die, because he's broken down Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. This shows you how far they have fallen. How far has the community fallen? I mean, in the law, of course, it was if somebody worshipped a false god, they were to be, cut down. They were to be executed for worshiping a Baal. Now, they want to kill Gideon for daring to tear down an altar of the enemy god, the Canaanite god. They're going to kill Gideon for trying to restore the true religion of his people. But his father, even though his father had a pagan altar apparently in his backyard, Joash says, oh, by the way, you know what the name Gideon means? Chopper. Chopper. He chopped down the pole. The name Gideon means chopper. Yeah, not motorcycle. Chopper. Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, are you going to plead Baal's case or cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. if Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar. In other words, if Baal is real, you don't need to fight his battles. If Baal is really mad for his altar being torn down, don't you think Baal can strike somebody down if he's real? He basically says, if Baal is really real, don't you think he'll take care of Gideon? He'll punish Gideon? And it says, and that day they called Gideon Jerubbaal. Jerubbaal, which means let Baal contend. Or in other words, his name means let Baal fight for himself. let Baal fight his own battles. That would be a longer way to say it, but let Baal contend. So they gave Gideon the nickname Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal contend with him, because he broke down Baal's altar. So Gideon escapes vigilante justice at that point. Now all the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern people joined forces and crossed over the Jordan and camped. This is the eastern people on the other side of the Jordan, and camped in the valley of Jezreel. So again, you see the map there. You see the Jordan River. You see the valley of Jezreel there in the upper left part of the map. There around the territory of the tribes of Asher and Zebulun. That's where the valley of Jezreel is. And that eastern side of the Jordan, you see there the Jordan River running through the middle of the map. So these people come from the eastern side of the Jordan and camped in the valley of Jezreel. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. He blew the trumpet, summoning the Abiezrites, which is his clan, to follow him. And he sent messengers throughout Manasseh, calling them to arms, and also into Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. These are three of the 12 tribes, so that they too went up to meet him. In other words, we're going to have a big battle with the Midianites and the Amalekites. So he's summoning men to come from these 4 tribes to fight against these Canaanites. And Gideon said to God, after he's called for men to step up and join the battle now, after that he says to God, if you'll save Israel by my hand, as you've promised, look, I'll place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there's dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I'll know that you'll save Israel by my hand, as you said. So basically he says, I need a sign here. I need a sign. I'm going to put out some fleece, make it wet, but everything around it dry, and I'll know you are sending me a sign. And it says, verse 38, and that's what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. So, he's satisfied, right? No. No, he's not satisfied. Then Gideon said to God, don't be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece. This time, make the fleece dry and the ground covered with dew. So do the opposite. The fleece is dry and the ground being wet. That night God did so, and only the fleece was dry and the ground was covered with dew. Now, have you ever heard anybody talk about putting out a fleece? Probably in a more conservative church. I don't know. This phrase would be like basically asking God for a sign. God, give me a sign. They call that putting out a fleece. But there's little notes in my Bible, and maybe it's in yours as well, something like that. It says, how much proof of God's will does one person need? It says, though the angel of the Lord had assured Gideon of success, he took fright and wanted to double check and then triple check by asking for miracles. In some circles today, putting out a fleece has come to mean asking God to do something unusual to confirm his guidance. However, Gideon's action seems more like a lack of faith than a model of seeking God's guidance. I don't think this is lifted up as this is a good way to ask for God's guidance. God, if you really want me to do this, let me win the lottery tomorrow. And if I win the lottery tomorrow, I'll know that you're serious, God, so that you really want me to do this. I don't think, it sounds awfully similar to when Jesus, when Satan says to Jesus in the wilderness, jump off the temple and God will catch you, he won't let you die. And it says in the Bible, he will not let your foot scratch it, Satan quotes the scriptures. And then Jesus also quotes the scriptures where it says, do not put the Lord your God to a test. In other words, don't ask for that kind of, don't do something stupid and then ask God to miraculously save you. Don't ask God for signs like that. The jokes are like, I was on a diet and I said, well, God, I really want a donut. God, if you want me to eat a donut, give me a parking place right in front of the donut store. And after 7 times around the block, sure enough, there was a parking place, I don't think Gideon is here a model of faith. I think he's a model of doubt. And you might say, well, Gideon and Thomas have something in common there. But God is willing to give him the signs. And so now Gideon, after getting these 2 different extra affirmations, is willing to go into battle. But now God is going to test him a little bit. Early in the morning, Zerubbabel, now he's calling him by his nickname, Zerubbabel, that is Gideon, and all of his men camped at the spring of Herod. This is not the same Herod as the New Testament Herod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. And the Lord said to Gideon, you have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands. In order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her, announce now to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. You know what he's saying? He's like, you got too many guys. And if you win the battle, you're going to go, yeah, we're great, we're strong, we're mighty warriors. They're going to forget to even mention God. They're going to be proud of their own strength, their own battle prowess. God says, no, you got too many men. You're going to claim that you won the battle, and instead it's going to be, I'm going to win the battle for you. So send a bunch of them home. So anybody who's chicken doesn't really want to fight, go home. And 22,000 guys leave and 10,000 stay. But the Lord said, verse 4, the Lord said to Gideon, there's still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I'll sift them for you there. If I say, this one shall go with you, he shall go. If I say, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So we're going to reduce the 10,000 down to a smaller number. So Gideon took the men down to the water, and the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog from those who kneel down to drink. And 300 men lapped with their hands to their mouths, and all the rest got down on their knees to drink. And I think, I've tried to picture both of these ways. I think we're talking about some of the men are doing this. Okay? Some of the men are just bending down and just drinking, putting their face in the water. And it's the men who do this who stay, And some people have said, well, they're the ones who are more battle ready because they're keeping their eyes up. And it doesn't say that in the Bible. It just says they had to go from 10,000 down to a smaller number. And so, the Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I'll save you and give the Midianites into your hand. Let all the other men go, each to his own place. So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites to their tents, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. So go from 32,000 to 300. They go from 32,000 to 10,000, and from 10,000 to 300. And now if they win the battle, it really is going to be miraculous. It is going to be God is the one winning this battle. But they take all the provisions and trumpets of the others, which is going to come into play. Because there weren't 32,000 trumpets, or even 10,000 trumpets, but there were 300 trumpets. Now, the camp of the Midians lay below him in the valley. During the night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up and go down against the camp, because I'm going to give it to your hands. And if you're afraid to attack," in other words, if you're still not convinced, "go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp." So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outskirts of the camp, sneaking down there in the middle of the night in the dark to kind of do a little recon there. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern people had settled in the valley thick as locusts. The camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. That's a lot of camels. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. "I had a dream," he was saying. "A round loaf of barley bread come tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed." His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." So he's having a dream that, hey, we're going to die. Gideon's going to come and get us. Gideon's going to come and smite us, is his dream. This idea is going to play into the hands of the plan of Gideon. So it says, when Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he worshiped God. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, "Get up." Still the middle of the night, remember. "Get up. The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of them with torches inside. You picture that. Got a trumpet and a jar with a lit torch inside the jar. "Watch me," he told them. "Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp blow yours and shout, 'For the Lord and for Gideon.'" Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guard. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. They all blow the trumpets and they break the jars, so suddenly there's 300 lights. It's like modern, like if suddenly there's 300 flashlights turned on at the same time. Okay? So the trumpets blow and they break the jars, so the lights, there's suddenly 300 torches and 300 trumpets blowing. The 3 companies blew their trumpets and smashed the jars. Grasping the torches in their left hand and holding in their right hand the trumpets they were to blow, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. What I believe we're to assume is that panic and chaos breaks out among the camp in the middle of the night. Because they're sound asleep, they hear 300 trumpets, they see 300 torches surrounding them, and they think they're about to be slaughtered by thousands and thousands of men. And they start panicking, and they start just swinging their swords. It says, when the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. So my thinking is it's just panic and chaos. And they just think, oh, hey, it's them, it's the Israelites. Ah! And they're killing each other instead of, And the army fled to Beth Shittah, towards Zerah as far as the border of Abel, Mecholah, near Tabath. Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh were called out. These are these other tribes. Now they call in the rest of the men on top of the 300. They pursued the Midianites, and Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize the waters of the Jordan ahead of them as far as Beth Barah." So now it's the mop-up operation as they're all fleeing in panic. More and more and more Israelite troops are there to kill them as they're fleeing. So the men of Ephraim were called out, and they took the waters of the Jordan as far as Beth Barah, and they captured 2 of the Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. I think those were names that they named those after the fact, probably. They pursued the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon, who was by the Jordan. This is a thing we see often about, this is one of those parts of the story that, like, when we tell kids the story of David and Goliath, you tend not to mention the part that then David cuts off Goliath's head. It's kind of, we tend to leave that part out when we tell the story, but that is in the Bible. So they take out 2 of the leaders. They're killing the marauders. And then now chapter 8, which is the last part of the story of Gideon, is chapter 8. Now the Ephraimites asked Gideon, this is another tribe. He's from Manasseh. Gideon is from the tribe of Manasseh. The Ephraim is another of the 12 tribes. The Ephraimites asked Gideon, "Why have you treated us like this? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight Midian?" And they criticized him sharply. Now that the battle is won, we would have fought. We want to be a part of the victory. And he answered them, "What have I accomplished compared to you? Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim's grapes better than the full grape harvest of Abiezer? God gave Oreb and Zeb, the Midianite leaders, into your hands. What was I able to do compared to you?" In other words, he does a little schmoozing here of, what you did was much more important than what I did. You brought me those heads. That was really great. So he's placating the tribe that didn't get to participate in the victory. Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted, yet keeping up the pursuit, came to the Jordan and crossed it. And he said to the men of Succoth, "Give my troops some bread. They're worn out. And I'm still pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the officials of Succoth said, "Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your troops?" Which is not a very hospitable response from fellow Israelites. And Gideon replied, "Just for that, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hands, I will tear your flesh with desert thorns and briars." So, since you're not willing to help, he went there to Peniel and made the same request of them. And they answered as the same as the men of Succoth did. And he said to the men of Peniel, "When I return in triumph, I'll tear down this tower." So, those who are unwilling to even give them rations are in trouble. This shows, see, there's lots of, one of the problems Israel has is not just all these Canaanites coming against them. This internal rivalry and internal strife is another part of what's wrong with Israel in this book. Now, Zebah and Zalmunna were in Krakor with a force of about 15,000 men, all that were left of the armies of the eastern people. 120 swordsmen had fallen. 120,000 swordsmen had fallen. And Gideon went up by the route of the nomads east of Nobah and Jogbehah and fell upon the unsuspecting army. And Zebah and Zalmunna, the 2 kings of Midian, fled. He pursued them and captured them, routing their entire army. And then Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle by the pass of Heres. He caught a young man of Succoth, questioned him, and the young man wrote down the names of the 77 officials of Succoth, the elders of the town. Gideon came and said to the men of Succoth, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, 'Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your exhausted men?' And he took the elders of the town and taught the men of Succoth a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars." Not exactly what kind of punishment that entailed. It doesn't sound pleasant. He pulled down the Tower of Peniel and killed the men of that town. This was not a pretty sight there. And then it says he asked Zela and Zalmunna, what kind of men did you kill at Tabor? Men like you, each one with the bearing of a prince. Gideon said, those are my brothers, the sons of my own mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you'd spared their lives, I would not kill you. But since you did, I'm going to kill you. Turning to his Zethar, his eldest son, he said, kill them. He says to his young son, kill these two kings. But Zethar didn't draw his sword. He was only a boy and was afraid. So, thinking 10, 11, 12-year-old probably. Zebah and Zimah said, come on, do it yourself. As is the man, so is his strength. So Gideon stepped forward and killed them and took the ornaments off their camels' necks. Notice how they don't want to be killed by a boy. No, that would be shameful to be killed by a boy. Now here's some of the sort of weird parts of as the mop-up of this story. The Israelites said to Gideon, rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you've saved us out of the hand of Midian. By saying, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson, what are they initiating there? They wanted to be a king. Yeah, hereditary rule. You rule over us, then your son, then his son. They're asking him basically to be a king. They don't use the word, but that's what it amounts to. But Gideon told them, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And this is a little bit of foreshadowing, because when we do get to the book of Samuel, Samuel is in many ways the last of the judges. There's also a prophet. And it's in the time of Samuel, the people of Israel say, all the other nations have kings. We want a king. We want to be like everybody else. And Samuel says, God is your king. The Lord is your king. And they're like, well, we want a person. We want a human king. We want to be like all the other countries that have a king. And Samuel goes to God, and God says to Samuel, they haven't rejected you, they've rejected me as their king, wanting a human king instead of simply following me. And so in that story, them demanding or asking or saying, we want to be like all the other countries, we want a king, God says that's a rejection of me. So this is kind of a foreshadowing and saying, we want you to be the king, Gideon. He says, no, I'm not to be your king. God is your king. God needs to be your king. He said, I do have one request, though. I'm not going to be your king, but I do have one request. Each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder. Because, of course, when they killed all these thousands of Midianites and, other ites, they took any of the valuables off their bodies, including things like gold earrings. It says it was the custom of the Ishmaelites. Remember, Ishmaelite is, we go all the way back, who's Ishmael? Yeah, Isaac's illegitimate half-brother. Ishmael is the son of Abraham by Sarah's maid, Hagar. Remember when Abraham gets really old and Sarah gets really old, and Sarah says, yeah, it's never going to happen for us. We're never going to have that baby. Why don't you sleep with my maid? And that way you can at least have a son. And Abraham sleeps with Hagar, and Hagar gives birth, Hagar, who's an Egyptian, and Hagar gives birth to Ishmael. And then Abraham was talking to God, and God says, you're going to have a great multitude of descendants. And Abraham says, yes, bless Ishmael. And God says, well, okay, I will, but that's not what I'm talking about. You're going to have a child from Sarah. And then Sarah, in her old age, gives birth to Isaac, Yitzhak, which means laughter. But the Ishmaelites become, the Arab people. The Arab people are the descendants of Ishmael. and become a constant enemy of the Israelites, then and now. So, as I said, in the Quran, the story of the near sacrifice of Isaac, it's not Isaac in the Quran, it's Ishmael in the Quran. That story is told pretty much the same way it's told in Genesis with Abraham and Isaac, but in the Quran it's Abraham and Ishmael is the story told in the Quran. So anyway, they're Ishmaelites and they would wear earrings. It's basically is the point there. They answer, so he says, well, I'm not going to be your king, but how about everybody give me one earring? You know, just as a little bonus here, a little something. They said, 25, we'll be glad to give him. We'll be glad to give him. So they spread out a garment, and each man threw a ring from his plunder onto it. So one little earring from each man. But that's a lot of men. The weight of the gold rings he asked for came to 1,700 shekels, which, if you want to do your handy math, that's about 43 pounds. So about 43 pounds of gold. Not counting the ornaments, the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains that were on the camel necks. Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which is like a, kind of a big, giant necklace kind of thing, like on Survivor. The thing they, and which he placed in his hometown of Ophrah. And then this little side note, because you can tell this is written after the fact. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there. It became a snare to Gideon and his family. So he makes this beautiful gold ephod, and as with so many things, it's big and gold and shiny, and people are like, oh, let's worship it. I mean, it becomes a god that is worshipped in his hometown. If you remember, again, another example of that. Do you remember one of the less known stories of the wandering in the desert? At one point, the Israelites in the desert, are constantly bickering, constantly moaning, constantly disobeying, constantly, giving Moses headaches. And at one point, I can't even remember the exact thing they do, but they do something really bad, and God sends some snakes to get them. And so Moses makes a golden snake on a pole that when they look at that, it cures them from the snake bite, And they put that as one of the holy relics until, of course, later on it becomes, guess what? An idol. And they start worshiping it. Anything that they turned into a graven image was a snare and became something that, and they had to destroy it later because people were worshiping it. And so this thing becomes an idol, this ephod that he makes. Now, the story of Gideon kind of wraps up here at the end of this chapter. Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites, and didn't raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land enjoyed peace for 40 years. And that goes back to our little chart of, how long did each of the judges reign? Notice it says for Gideon, number 5, he's from the tribe of Manasseh. He reigned for 40 years. Who did he fight? The Midianites and the Amalekites. You can tell the length of the reign, the place in the book of Judges they're talked about, and what their primary enemy was. Of course, we go back, if you go down to Samson, it's the Philistines instead of the Midianites or the Amalekites. So he reigns for 40, he rules or judges for 40 years. Here it calls him Jerubbaal. Remember, that's his other name. Jerubbaal is Gideon's other name, son of Joash. Went back to his hometown to live. He had 70 sons of his own because he had many wives. You've got to have a lot of wives to have 70 sons. His concubine, let's remember, wealthy men, had not only wives, they had, concubine is basically another word for harem girl. I mean, they wives, but were still attached to the man. His concubine, who lived in Shechem, this is going to be important here because I'm going to follow through with just a minute here. In Shechem, also bore him a son whom he named Abimelech. Okay. So he had wives from his own town and tribe. Well, not just tribe, clan. He had 70 sons from his wives, from his own sort of family group. And he had a concubine, a harem girl, a slave woman, whatever you want to call it, slave girl, who bore him a son named Abimelech. Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age, was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Okay, thus ends the story, but we're going to, it's a little bit past him to see what happened with this son, because this son, Abimelech, we're going to go and hear about him, just to kind of finish the story here in a minute, in chapter 9. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. So, as soon as he dies, the same old stuff rises up again. They fall into idolatry. They fall into worshiping the pagan fertility gods once again. They set up Baal-Berith as their god and didn't remember the Lord their God, who'd rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. And they failed to show kindness to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, for all the good things he had done for them. Now, what becomes of his 70 sons and this one sort of illegitimate son or bastard son named Abimelech? Well, we'll just go a little farther to hear what happened with that in chapter 9. Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, a.k.a. Gideon, went to his mother's brothers in Shechem. Remember, he's not from Gideon's town. He's from a different town called Shechem. He's the son of the slave woman. So he goes to his mother's town, which is different from Gideon's town. He went to his mother's brothers in Shechem and said to them and to all on his mother's clan, his mother being the slave woman, ask all the citizens of Shechem, which is better for you, to have all 70 of Jerubbaal, a.k.a. Gideon, sons rule over you, or just one man? What would be better, to have 70 of his sons rule over you, or just one man? Remember, I am your flesh and blood. My mother is one of you. The 70 other sons are not from our family. I'm the only son of Gideon who's one of you. Who would you rather have? 70 sons rule over you, or one son who is your flesh and blood? When the brothers repeated all this to the citizens of Shechem, they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he's our brother. They gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-Berith, and Abimelech used it to hire reckless adventurers. Reckless adventurers. We would probably call them thugs, hoodlums, scallywags, ruffians, scoundrels, ne'er-do-wells, who became his followers. He went to his father's home in Ophrah, and on one stone murdered his 70 brothers. Murdered his 70 brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, a.k.a. Gideon, escaped by hiding. Then all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo gathered beside the great tree at the pillar in Shechem to crown Abimelech king. So the son of the slave woman gets a bunch of hoodlums together, and they murder the 70 legitimate sons of Gideon. But one son, one legitimate son of Gideon escapes. The youngest of the 70 escapes, Jotham. When Jotham was told about this, that they've crowned Abimelech king, when Jotham was told about this, he climbed up on top of Mount Gerizim and shouted to them, "Listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you." And he tells them a parable. One day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, "Be our king." But the olive tree answered, "Should I give up my oil by which both gods and men are honored to hold sway over the trees?" In other words, the olive tree says, "I don't want to be king of the trees." Next, the tree said to the fig tree, "Come and be our king." But the fig tree replied, "Should I give up my fruit so good and sweet to hold sway over the trees?" The fig tree doesn't want to be the king of the trees. The tree said to the vine, "Come and be our king." But the vine answered, "Should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and men, to hold sway over the trees?" The grapevine does not want to be king of the trees. Finally, all the trees said to the thorn bush, "Come and be our king." The thorn bush said to the trees, "If you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, then let fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon." "Now," says the youngest son of Gideon, "if you have acted honorably and in good faith when you made Abimelech king, and if you have been fair to Jerubbaal, aka Gideon, and his family, and if you've treated him as he deserves, and to think that my father fought for you, risk his life to rescue you from the hand of Midian. But today you've revolted against my father's family and murdered his 70 sons on a single stone, and made Abimelech, the son of his slave girl, king over the citizens of Shechem because he's your brother. If," that's a big side note there, "if you have acted honorably and in good faith towards Jerubbaal and his family today, may Abimelech be your joy, and may you be his too. But if you have not, may fire come out from Abimelech and consume you, citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo. And let fire come out from you, citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and consume Abimelech." Then Jotham fled, escaping to Beer, and he lived there because he was afraid of his brother Abimelech. And after Abimelech had governed Israel for 3 years, God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem, who acted treacherously against Abimelech. So you see, the little parable there is like, okay, think about who you're choosing for your king. You're not choosing the one who produces grapes or fruit. You're not producing the one who brings figs and all that. You're choosing a thorn bush. And you're going to live to regret it. You're going to live to regret it. And you see there in verse 22, there becomes now hostility between Abimelech and the people, his own clan, who had made him their king. It says, verse 24, God did this in order that the crime against Jerubbaal's 70 sons, the shedding of their blood, might be avenged on their brother Abimelech and on the citizens of Shechem who'd helped him murder his brothers. In opposition to him, these citizens of Shechem set men on hilltops to ambush and rob everyone who passed by, and this was reported to Abimelech. Now, I'm not going to go through, there's a lot of intrigue and back and forth between all of that, and there, I'm not going to go through all of that, but there is increasing hostility around all this mess. Abimelech, the people of Shechem, etc. And the upshot of it is Abimelech kills a whole lot of folks, and he kills some of his opposition. But going down to verse 46, because the rest, what's in between is pretty complicated, and I can't give it justice. But 46, the citizens in the tower of Shechem went into the stronghold of the temple of El-Berith. When Abimelech heard that they had assembled there, he and his men, who's now against his own people, went up to Mount Zalmon. They took an axe and cut off some branches, which he lifted to his shoulders. He ordered his men with him, "Quick, do what you've seen me do." The men cut branches and followed Abimelech, and they piled them on the stronghold and set it on fire over the people inside. So the people in the tower of Shechem, about 1,000 men and women, died. So he turns against the people who set him up as king, sets their tower on fire, kills 1,000 of the citizens of Shechem. Okay? Then Abimelech went to Thebez and besieged it. Inside the city, however, was a strong tower to which all the men and women, the people of the city, fled. And they locked themselves in and climbed up the tower roof. Abimelech went to the tower and stormed it. But as he approached, so he's already burned down the tower of the people who made him king because of the enmity and the jealousy and the infighting that happened between them. But if you want to read about all that, you can read the intervening verses. But when he approached this tower to set it on fire, a woman dropped a millstone on his head and cracked his skull. Hurriedly, he called to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and kill me, so they can't say a woman killed him." Because the only thing worse than being killed by a boy was being killed by a woman. So he says to his armor bearer, "Kill me now, so that nobody can say Abimelech was killed by a woman. She dropped a rock on his head." So his servant ran him through, and he died. When the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they went home. Thus God repaid the wickedness that Abimelech had done to his father by murdering his 70 brothers. God also made the men of Shechem pay for all their wickedness, and the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal, came on them. That's the young son who warned them about what would happen if they chose Abimelech to rule over them. But of course, if you look at the chart, Abimelech is listed as having ruled for 3 years, as it said, as one of the judges. Which is another saying, the judges are not all, by any means, heroes. They are not all men to be, or Deborah is a good woman, but Deborah is the one woman in this list. Many of these so-called judges are not, by any means, role models. As I said last week, Samson is pretty iffy in terms of God uses him to kill a bunch of Philistines, but he's a pretty shady guy. Gideon, it comes off pretty well as something of a skeptic, a little bit of doubting, but in general, Gideon himself comes off pretty well. His one illegitimate son, or son by the slave woman, obviously is a horrible, horrible man who kills all of his brothers, save one. And as you read through these stories, it's a real mixed bag. I read one commentary that said, this book is just, some of these stories are not uplifting. The men are not heroic. They're not, and one scholar, commentator said, the point of the book is the people got the kind of rulers they deserved because of their constant disobedience. You get the rulers you deserve. which is usually, I mean, I don't know if you can make that blanket statement about all times and all places, but, you get the rulers you deserve in some ways. And in this case, the people of Israel were, as I said, were constantly in, rejecting God. Constantly rejecting God, turning away. And the worship of Baal became so common that those who followed the Lord were the outliers. And that's why the end of the book of Judges, when you get to the end of the book, this statement that's on this little handout, is the very last verse of the book. It's Judges 21:25, which is the last verse of the book, which is, in those days Israel had no king, everyone did as he saw fit. In other words, that's what the word anarchy literally means. Ark means king. So monarchy means one king. A monarchy is one king. But anarchy is no king. Just like a theist is somebody who believes in a god, an atheist is somebody who doesn't believe in God. You put the A in front of it to negate it. So atheist means no God, anarchy means no king. So when the word anarchy basically means everybody's doing whatever they want. Everybody's doing whatever they think is right, and that leads to chaos. And there's different kinds of rule. I mean, there's monarchies, which for the ancient world was pretty much, it was either monarchy or anarchy or theocracy, ruled by God. The Greeks at least are the ones who claim, and I think rightfully so, the Greeks are the ones who claim invent democracy. But democracy is, not very prevalent until at least, 17th century, maybe, so 18th century. And still, in many parts of the world, we're not democratic, And there are places like Haiti that is anarchy. The government does not function in Haiti. It is ruled by street gangs. So it is literally anarchy in Haiti. It's just why they've said no plane can land there anymore, because the government has no control of the entire island. It is anarchy. But anyway, so the Judges is a fascinating book. It's sometimes, you say, well, like the story of Gideon, is Gideon a model of faith? Well, no, he kept asking for more and more proof and signs. I think there is if you want to pull some of the good moral lessons out of it, or at least the biblical lessons out of it, the main lesson of I think of Gideon is, God said, if 32,000 men win this battle, you're going to just claim you did it. But I'm going to use a small number so that you can't say it was from your strength. You'll have to know it was God. It was God that did it, with 300 men defeating thousands. And Paul talks about how he had a thorn in the flesh. And we don't know exactly what it was. He talks about this thorn in the flesh that he prayed God to take away. We think it was maybe migraines or something with his eyes. And God said, no, my grace is sufficient. In other words, I work through your weaknesses. I work through people who are weak, so that everyone will know it's not, we don't do it by our power, we do it with God's power. Which is one of the very first things we learn as preschoolers, right? We are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. We are weak, but he is strong. And when we think, I don't need God at all. I can do it on my own. I don't need any God. I don't need God at all. over and over in the Bible and in life, I think we discover we do. That it's, he is, Paul, in his imprisonment and persecution says, but I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, which is the right context of that verse that is often put on t-shirts and mugs and banners at high school football games. Which when a high school football team has a banner that says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, it's not bad, but it's way out of context. It's like, it's not about winning the football game, it's about being able to live for God in spite of persecution and weakness and imprisonment and all these other things. I can still do all things through Christ, who gives me strength in the midst of strife and trouble and problems. As much as I love the Sooners, I do not pray for their victory. I don't, because I know that people on the other team would pray just as hard for their team. I don't think that's where that verse comes into play. Pray for their health, but so that's a few morsels from the book of Judges. So let me pray. Lord, these stories sometimes we see ourselves in the flaws of the people. We see you giving strength in the midst of weakness, rescuing us when we can't rescue ourselves. Lord, once again we realize there's no perfect people in the Bible except for Jesus. They're all flawed just like us. Help us to glean those things that help us and see those things that are things we need to stay away from. And help us to learn lessons from these stories that help us along our way. Thank you for loving us in spite of our flaws and in spite of our weaknesses and giving us strength to face challenges every day.